judge will bang the gavel and threaten contempt of court and all sorts of dire punishments. Here, everybody has to be serious. Parade ground. All those Marines lined up, and they salute the flag, and they have to have a very grim expression on it. Serious. And so, they have to be serious because kings are afraid of laughter. They're being attacked suddenly. Somebody has to kneel down. Because if you kneel down or prostrate yourself, you're at a disadvantage. And the king stands or sits at his throne with his bodyguards ranged on either side. They've already got the form of a church. Attendant canons and 30 flanking him on either side. And so certain great Catholic cathedrals are called basilica. And basilica, from the Greek, basileus, is the king. So the basilica is the very titles of God in the Bible. King of Kings and Lord of Lords are, of course, on the Persian emperor. The Cyrus, which is the Greek word, Kyrios, meaning Lord. So the Mass begins with the invocation, the eleison, Lord have mercy upon us. The titles are borrowed from the Persian emperor. And so the rites that have become associated with Christian religion are reflections of those great autocratic monarchs of the ancient Near East, the Cyruses of Persia, the pharaohs of Egypt, and people like Hammurabi, the great Chaldean monarch. The universe was conceived then as being ruled on a political pattern. Like that. So, the Hammurabi in particular, and Moses after him, they were the wide down rules. They were the patriarchs who say, now this is the way everybody's going to behave. And since you can't all agree among yourselves as to what the rule's going to be, I'm going to tell you what to do. And since I'm the toughest guy, and I got these brothers of mine who are tough too, we're going to say, this is the law, see? And you've got to obey. So, this is the law of nature. That somebody told nature what to do. For example, the wonderful poem by Father Feeney about bees. God, sticky stuff, not yet alive and alive, said, come, hum. Be it buzz as I bid. And sure enough, it was, and it did. See, and in the beginning, let them flight. So commandment is the fundamental idea. So the quest of the law of nature is the quest for the true understanding of the Word of God. The word of the Lord was the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is that word? If we got the Word of God, here is the idea, you see, we could perform in magic. That's why, for example, the name of God in the Bible is not to be uttered except once by the high priest in the Holy of Holies. Otherwise, that name, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh in Hebrew, we don't really know how it was pronounced. And Jehovah mixes up those consonants with the vowels of Adonai. And that's a translation. But anyway, Jehovah is a polite way of can't be said. Because if you know the word, if you know the name of God, you have power. You have the power of God. And so all ancient ideas of magic were based on knowing the names of God. It is said that there are 100 names of God. 99 are revealed to us. And the camel was the 100th name, which is why he looks so snooty. But so also, in what we now call primitive orders of society, are loath to reveal their names. Because if I know your true name, I can utter it and have power over you. Now, you say, well, that's a very nice idea, but it is exactly through the knowledge of names that we have Western science. And that is magic. That is through trying to understand the laws of nature. So that if you understand the word, underneath all the phenomena, you could change the phenomena and create magic. Only this, that many scientists have got rather sophisticated and have realized that comes later than the event. That in the beginning wasn't the word. Of course, if you want to make new sense in the beginning was the word, you have to go to Hinduism, where they have the idea that Vak, V-A-C in Sanskrit, or is the basis of creation. But by this, they fundamentally vibration as sound. You see? They say that is, you see, if you listen to sound, right down into it. Fundamentally, get what sound is all about the whole mystery of things. Because the whole mystery of things is vibrating in it, on and off. Simple as that. Life and death. Life is on, death is off. Have to have off, have on, have to have on, have off. What a relief. But they have it at the beginning. Now, but they also say, in another sense, on another level, that the roots of Sanskrit, say the root form, say the word, but comes from the root form, but, which means to know or to be awake. Bhava, which means becoming, comes from the root bhu, which means to grow. So on. Karma, doing, comes from the root kri, to act. So they say that the roots of Sanskrit are not simply the roots, because in another sense, altogether, you see, you create the world by the word. And this is something that we're not very conscious of. It's the way you think that determines your basic what happens in the world. Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or ill, but thinking makes it so. Thinking is talking to yourself inside your head. And we, through this, build up all sorts. We say, for example, well, one day you'll have to die. Have to. What's the emotional content of saying you'll have to die? It means being imposed upon you against your will. So to put in this passive, you'll be compelled to die. But I can't be compelled to die unless I'm fighting it. Supposing I want to die. Supposing I commit suicide. Or supposing we look at it all and say, when I get a disease and die as a result of it, getting a disease is something I do. Just as much as taking a walk. Only we've got our thoughts arranged so that you ought not to get a disease. Even if it's just plain old age. Somehow you ought not to do that. You ought to go on. You can't say, when death comes about, take me down with a will. Because we've got this hang-up about life being divided into things that we do on the one hand and things that happen to us on the other. And Buddhists say, what happens to you is your karma. And people don't readily understand that. They think my karma, something bad I did in my last. And therefore, I've got bad karma. Karma. So that when something that happens to me is called my karma. And if you recognize that it's your own doing, it's never bad karma. It's only if you refuse to admit that it's your own doing and merely blame someone or something else that it's something that happened to you. Now, I digressed a little because what I was getting at was the meaning of the law of nature. The laws of nature. The word taken over, the idea of the law of nature was built by Western science. From this ancient magical notion of the word of God, the commandment of God, being the foundation for everything that happens in the world. But now, today, in Western 20th century science, there is an entirely new idea of the law of nature. Exist in any real sense, which, like the motion of stars or the behavior of animals and rocks, they're not phenomena which these things obey. The universe is, because we have a certain kind of structure and brain, we want a sense of it. Therefore, we find various ways of understanding the world by the principle of regularity. Let's take a clock. A clock ticks regularly. But the world does not tick regularly. Inconveniently enough, the sun does not have the earth go around it in a neat 360 days. This has always irritated calendar makers. How to make a rational calendar? There is no solution. Because the rotations of the earth upon its own axis synchronized with its rotation around the sun. So what we do is we things have invented for measuring things. And so we can cut out a piece of cloth or a trunk of tree so many feet, carrying the trunk with us by putting our feet over it one after another, saying it's so many feet long, or so many spans. Inches, of course, one joint. I'm not sure how much. And so this comparison of man's body, I mean, 5 fingers on either side makes 10, 5 toes on the other side makes, putting ourselves out, as it were, against it, we measured it. And the idea of this, of measurement, is the same idea as the idea of the law of nature. A law or a hammer or a saw of thinking, which enables us to control our environment. Observing regularities, and then by making a calculus, which is a process really of, will it be regular next time? And the odds are that if it's done it once, it's likely to do it again that way. So in this way, you predict eclipses of the sun. You predict the phases of the moon. You measure, you count it, how it went, how often it did it like this, how often it did it like that. You say, well, it seems to obey me, because now I can tell you any time it's going to come up. And if the other people around haven't figured it out, they think I'm magic, because I'm going to say to them, the moon is at such and such a time, so many days from now it's going to have a different shape. And they'll say, my God, he was right. And they'll think I'm making it happen, because I can do that. It's in a rather privileged position, because I could predict. But that's the basic idea, you see, of the law of nature. The law of nature is a human, like the lines of celestial latitude and longitude. They don't exist in the heavens. But we project them on the sky in order to measure the positions of the stars. Because the stars are scattered in a very confusing way. Try and remember that and figure it out. But the network, the spherical network. You can number all the squares in the spherical network in accordance with the principle of the circle, the 360 degrees. You've thrown the network on the sky. It isn't really there, see? Then to help you a little further, pick out some of the big stars and see if they make a shape. This is like doing a Rorschach test. And you see, oh look, there's one over there that looks like a dipper. Or some people call it a plow. And there's one there that looks like a cross. And there's one there that, by some extreme wangling, is a virgin. And all these lines that join the concept together are our ways of projecting a pattern upon this great and glorious confusion, so that we can remember it and chart it. But I'll very well see that if you looked at this same pattern of stars from some completely different position in space, all those constellations and their arrangements would vanish. And you'd have to invent a new one. Because there is there where the stars really are. It depends where you're looking from. So in this sense then, man in nature with his extraordinary symmetrical brain and its sitting complications figures it out. And it's man who introduces the law into the world. He is it. But in a way, invenire, to invent, is to discover. But what we discover is something that's out there. When we know nature, we are discovering something about ourselves and our own passion for control. What has to be law. So going back right now to the beginning of what I started to say. The question then, what is the laws of which the world is composed? Well, you watch the game of billiards, cue, and it hits that ball, and then it hits and then that hits that one, and then that hits that one. And so the final ball, which moves into the pocket, has its behavior explained through its contact laws and the final contact with the cue. That's why it did it. And so this view of the world as something that happens, the mechanical process of the law of cause and effect, is one that is really basic to most people's common sense today, to most educated people. would say it's difficult to figure it all out because it's complicated, but if you could know all the details involved in the single behavior or a single act of a human mind, and it was the ineluctable result of a series of bouncing balls against each other, fundamental atoms that predispose the great final event. So that theory of the relationship between the atoms is, in technical language, catenary. C-A-T-E-N-A-R-Y, catenary. A catenary effect, or a relationship between events, is like, for example, to use another illustration, where you stand a row of bricks and that is a catenary sequence. But it becomes increasingly obvious today to the biology that will not do as a sufficient description of how various events affect each other. And so there's another type of causal relationship altogether, which is called instead reticulate. R-E-I-C-U-L-A-T-E, reticulate, from the Latin rete, meaning a net relation. Wherein, in other words, any given event is not simply ascribed to one or more previous events, but that the relationship between the past and the present, and between the present and the future, is all to be taken into consideration in understanding any one event. In other words, let's take one event. I drop a ball and it bounces. Let's say, it's an event. I don't know how many events really is, for the sake of argument, that it's an event. Now, is it enough in describing this event to say, I let the ball go, it obeyed the law of gravity, but because it was made of rubber and had some air inside it, it bounced, and sort of slightly disobeyed gravity because it had an energy in it. But that's not enough. Dropped. That I let it go. That depended not merely upon a sequence of events that you can lay out in a string along a line of time. It depends on a present context. There must be a certain density of air. All kinds of things have to coexist with this in order for me to grow, much less manufacturable. So what happens you can see as a historical phenomenon, but it must be seen in context. Context is terribly important, because it isn't just when a thing happens. So that you could say that my blood in my veins is in a certain setting. In a test tube, and in a test tube, my blood is not behaving in the way it behaves. It's not the same thing. So, an individual person in one setting will behave in one way, in another setting in a completely different way. When I was at home with my parents, when I went to visit my uncle and aunt, I was someone different. When I was with my peers, I was someone quite different. Because I changed according to the setting, and children are very well aware of this. It's only as we go on that we keep having it drummed into our heads that we ought to have a consistent character, because we're in novels where the characters are supposed to be consistent. Now, if you have a consistent character, you ought to behave the same in all circumstances as to all people. That merely means you become inflexible. Are, therefore, depend on the context in which they're found. Upon network relationship to everything else that's going on. And one of the reasons for this, which is to lead us profound but much simpler, is, of course, that the whole notion of a thing, of an event in nature, and of causal relationships between different events is a purely abstract idea. It does not really fit the facts of nature at all. In nature, in this physical world that you feel when you hold your head, or hold somebody's hand, or just breathe, there aren't any separate events. None whatever. Sure, there are all sorts of wiggles, all sorts of lines, all sorts of colors, all sorts of faces, all sorts of forms. But they're not separate. separate an inside of your skin from the outside of the skin. Because you can see the outside of your skin, there'd be no inside. It takes the outside and the inside working together to create this situation. And in this way, the situation of the body wouldn't be operating unless there was air around here to breathe. This physical phenomenon goes with the situation of there being air. Not true. It went inside the air in a rather complicated way. And other people watching say, oh, something going on over there. Because it remains rather constant except when there's a gale. And so you don't pay much attention to it because it's always around. What you pay attention to is what changes rapidly. And you say, well, that's that. Say, hey, you say to someone, you see this change over there, say, what's that? And he knows what you mean by that. That means something on the end of a finger point. It's different. It's peculiar. See? Because that's a that. So from a that, or a thing, a that. But all these that's that are happening are disconnected. They go with each other, just as I go with the surrounding air, and just as this whole situation in which we are at this moment is a complete going withness. Now here then we get to the fundamental idea of this idea of going with. And from this we shall be able to construct the whole notion of network. And this is the idea I said at the beginning. It's extremely simple, but very difficult for people brought up to use Western languages to understand. Now going withness, we could call it relativity. Relation. Means simply, let me first of all put it in a very extreme form. Consider yourself, sitting here at this moment, being just exactly the sort of person you are. Neurotic, maybe a little sick physically, maybe a little ashamed of yourself for some reason or other, or whatever. Just the way you are anyway, just like that, sitting here. That situation goes with, as back goes, the entire situation of the rest of the universe. You, as you are, exactly the way you are, and you really don't know what that is. You may have some opinions about it. No. That goes with the whole of the rest of boundless being is arranged. Now it isn't that the way the rest of boundless being is arranged is determined to be the way you are. If that's true, if it determines you, then we must also allow the other side of the picture that you determine. It's your karma. You did it. But you say, no, but I didn't help it. It did me. But this doesn't. The argument was stupid. Because you and it are one event. It isn't a question of it controlling you or you controlling it. It's all one event. As Talha Chardin said, the whole is the only true atom. The only truly indivisible whole. The human being, though, finds this difficult to understand. Because we're always telling each other, you want to change. Don't be like that. Now listen, you're sick, and I got a system. I've got a real school here, a thing that is very, and you should come and study with that. It may not be mine, it may be some big sage or pundit that I know, and you should come around and study that. And I've done this for a long time. Because I find of opinion of all the sorts of things that I should do to get myself in shape. And I realized that if I followed this advice, an entire day doing exercises in preparation for life. I don't know when I'll ever get around to that. My half an hour's yoga practice, 1 hour of so much physical exercises and so much memory practice, so much special to be sure that I got proper food. And if I think that's all true, I think, oh my God. Then another school of thought will say, no, that's the thing, you're getting confused. Just do one thing. But then I say, how am I going to choose which one I'm going to do? Well, he says, obviously this one's the best. And before you know where you are, you're sewed up by some religious fanatic. Now, please, I don't want to do this to you. Please don't think that I have any such recipe that I'm going to give you anything anything to do for 5 minutes every morning. I just am not. I want to, my whole notion would be to be free, so that you don't have to attend one. That's the idea, really. As far as my own livelihood is concerned, that there are always more people. No, I don't collect the following, and there are plenty more people to fill the vacuum. But this is the whole idea that we're going to work on of a net. That you are like a dewdrop on a multidimensional. Carefully, you will see that in every dewdrop there are reflections of all the other dewdrops. So the way that dewdrop looks goes with the way all the other ones look. See? A particular glimmer and so on. Its peculiar position is the position in the cosmos. The reflections in every one of them are different, according to the position they're in and the other dewdrops that they represent such angles. But nevertheless, the whole network, all the dewdrops, depend on each individual dewdrop. Individual dewdrop mutually depends on all the others. And that's sort of the scheme we're living in. And it little bit affronts our logic at first, because we say, I can understand that I depend on this universe, because after all, I am the help of the society. Something I needed to follow and mother. But looking at it from the other point of view, I find it very difficult to see how the whole thing depends on me. That's because we've been brought down theory of the individual. Our children should be seen. You are the servant and subject of God. Don't you ask impertinent questions. Another way of putting us down is to say, well, it's a piece of a fluke in a mindless mechanism. So we always manage not to find out that the relationship of the network is mutual. It runs both ways. It depends on you just as much as you depend on it. Because you see, it's you with your ingenious brain. For example, turns vibrations of air into sound. You turn whatever the sun is doing into light. You turn whatever the air is doing into a sky called blue. It's just like if you hit a drum, it's got no skin, it's a tight skin that evokes the noise out of a moving fist. No noise. So you, as the reflector, you, as the so-called reflector of all that goes on, by the constitution of what kind of a reflector you are, you evoke sun, moon, and stars. They're vast in relation to you. They're not really vast. And if you compare them with yourself, they're vast. They could be considered very tiny. The space between two sides of a hair could be considered vast if you want to. One diameter of a hair. And if you what we call a vast subject. Study from microscopy. It is a vast subject. But the basic principle, the thing I really want to try and get across, is this idea of going with the universe around you, you're outside, just as much as the organs inside. You go with it, the same way that the stalk goes with the root. As say, in the wretched terms that we have to use out of our language, it underlies everything. And let me repeat that. The universe does not control the small individual any more than the small individual controls the crystal. This is not a question of control. It is a question of more like dancing, of what happens, rather than what makes it happen. It's not made to happen. Only if you insist a certain event is quite different, then you can think of it being made to happen by the events that came before it. But if you realize they're all part or different aspects, different phases of one event, then you see it happening and you don't see anything making it happen. reinforcing that whole idea of things being back to the idea of a universe based on a monarchical image. Well, the past, damn it, you do that, and the thing can't help it, and so it's made to happen. I'd say in Chinese, the universe is just not seen in that way. It's not seen as anything is not made to happen. It is what does happen, but it's all interrelated. Therefore, there is a pattern to it. There is an order to it. The order of the net. I was talking in last night's session about the nature of networks.
Might be a gift for you.
And you remember that I explained the exceptions of causal relations between things and events. And I never write these down unless you've forgotten them. There's the catenary and the reticulate. In this kind, explaining links in a causal chain. And so every happening that is identified as a thing or an event, which is, however, quite an arbitrary kind of selection, is explained by its past, by the chain of events within a causal sequence. On the other hand, in thinking of the reticulate relationship, a thing is explained not simply by its relationship to past events, but by its context, that is, the relationship to present and future events, so that every event becomes something in a network. Now, you will understand that when you see the knots in a network, or better, parts of the net, held together by each other. Imagine the kind of network where instead of there being, something like knitting, the stitches are all together, and if something breaks at one point, the thing starts. So, the reticulate view, or the net view of the universe, is one, the Buddhists say, everything mutually traits everything. So, as I was trying to make the central point, the point of implication, relativity, that things go together like two sticks standing on the ground in this way. See? Mutual support. Or like the three rings, the trademark, or the Christian symbol of the Holy Trinity. Those rings lock. But take one of them away, and the engine is broken down for all of them. In the same way, individual, although seeming to be something that rattles around in the universe, or a given planet or a given star, seems to be something that is moving on its motion of stars, is a situation that arises only because of the mutual interdependence of all stars. Because, to take a very simple illustration, if there is only one star in the whole universe, we ascribe to it. It can't even be said to be still. Nobody knows what it's doing, because there's nothing for it to relate to. But take two stars, and they can get nearer to each other or further away from each other. Stars. And then you have, say, two close together, and one of them seems to go away. Now, who is moving away from who? Are the two stars saying, hey, we don't like you, we're going to go away? Or are they saying to the others, why don't you like us? Why do you... Well, who's right? Well, you can say on the principle of democracy that the majority must be right. But then they say, well, let's have an umpire, and we have a fourth stand above us. Two stars can only move in a straight line with respect to each other. Three stars can move in a plane with respect to each other, but a fourth star can establish a third dimension, where we can look down on you and take an objective standpoint. But then the argument is which one of them is the fourth. But that's the way the whole universe is constructed. It's a relativity system in which motion depends on comparison with something relatively still. And there can't be any motion at all unless there's a comparison. So, because of this relationship, every individual related to everything else that's going on, that you imply it. Somebody who was a great scientist should work together. who studied a human body carefully and figured out the conditions under which such a thing would exist, he would come to the conclusion that the human body nothing from such as we have. He would find that your structure and your behavior implied the same thing. With a laser beam system, you can photograph a small fragment of any photographic negative. From that tiny fragment, you can reconstruct the whole picture from which it was taken, because the crystalline tensions in that fragment imply the whole context of crystalline tensions that belong to that particular negative. So in exactly the same way, you as an individual in this world, and this world mutually implies you. And you are a natural formation, moving in and with this universe, not determined by it, because this is not determinism. But you are moving with it in just the same harmonious way that you notice the waves moving, and the trees growing, and the clouds moving. As you don't accuse the clouds of making aesthetic mistakes. So really is a certain light in which you can see human beings, both good and bad, as forms of. You may have fashionable discriminations about who is beautiful and who is ugly, physical discriminations about who is sick and who is healthy. You may have moral discriminations about who is good and evil. These are all points of view, relative points of view, because they are parts of the functioning of the whole. The fact that you take those points of view, that too is part of nature. But a skillful person on two levels at once. You live basically on the level where you know there are no mistakes. Everything moves in accordance with what the Chinese call the Tao, the way of nature. And if you have a basic feeling, you will always be sane. But you are able to comment within that feeling. Point of view, things are good and bad. Just as in the confines of this room and this area, it's perfectly clear that the difference between the up direction and the down direction. But we know that this area is situated in interstellar space, and there is no up and no down. Now the second situation doesn't contradict the first. But if you have only the point of view, if you take your fundamental stand as a being on the difference between good and evil, you get in the Christian hang-up. You have then to say that there is an eternal hell, that the distinction between good and evil is radical. And if you do that, you begin to suffer from a disease called chronic guilt, which is one of the most destructive emotions anybody can have. You feel an outcast from the universe, at odds with the reality itself, at odds with God. It sends people quite mad. Western civilization. It's making too much of a good thing out of the distinction between good and evil. It is an important distinction, but it's not fundamentally important. And you have to learn to admit different degrees of importance. And just say that because you can't just say that because a certain distinction isn't absolute, that it's not important. After all, your own physical formation is absolute, but it's. So, the situation of man in this network is to repeat the on the one hand, that he as an organism, psychophysical organism, is something that the whole cosmos is doing. That was as much of truth, I think, as there is in modern astrology, which I regard as a pseudoscience. But it is based on a very fundamental of a person's soul. You draw a small picture of the universe, a very crude picture. That is the design of that individuality. The truth is, therefore, that your soul is something which contains your body. Your body, your soul inside it like a spook. And the whole cosmos is your soul. So the cosmos is doing you at the point. You're doing it. And that depends upon the other. You have difficulty in conceiving this as a Westerner, because we have all been crushed by several centuries of put-down theories of man. That you were a beautiful subject, and B, that you were just the fortuitous congress of atoms in a mindless. of incredible vastness. Having entertained those two theories of man and of existence for so many, very much brainwashed into being unable to see that the universe are mutually causative, or to use the Chinese expression, mutually arising. Then, a second difficulty arises in this, which requires that I bring in some ideas, first of all, from Buckminster Fuller. The principal notion of Buckminster Fuller's thought, and if you don't know this name, Buckminster Fuller is what I would call a philosophical engineer, who is one of the most creative minds in the modern world. He invented the geodesic dome, which is his main claim to economic fame. That he's done a great deal of extremely fascinating thinking. And the situation of man in the universe. And the term, synergy, coming from the Greek, syn, with, ergos, work. But what he means by synergy is this, that as a whole, it's greater than any one of its parts. This is a difficult idea to swallow, because he applies it to technology in this way, that the industrial natural complex in which we live is something that is going in a certain direction, you like it or not, and that it organizes your behavior in a more intelligent way than organize it. And he believes that the increasing complexity of the industrial complex, say, outlaw such lunacy as war, it will make it impossible. And that we shall find ourselves increasingly organized by an intelligent system that is not under our conscious direction, but will make us feel as our individual selves feel inside our bodies. He gives an illustration, and so on, all the way through. Then, when you want to define yourself, you cannot say that I am what is skin goes with everything outside it, and constitutes a single of diversified behaviors. You look at that then from a strictly physical point of view. Network. But then the trouble comes up is zoology, astronomy, and so on. You say, yes, I see that. That's quite true, theoretically. But I would like to be able to feel that this is so, as mystics report that they to have that kind of experience in which it's absolutely clear. Because you see, if we don't take it that far, if we know about it theoretically only, the theoretical knowledge is not going to have an effect on what we do. But knowledge of a more emotionally compelling nature in the act with respect to our environment. And in fact, prevent us from destroying our environment, as we are now very visibly doing. It's interesting that the Congress of the United States recently passed an act making it a very serious offense. And they passed this act with many patriotic speeches and rhetoric. This is a most fantastic example of American confusion between symbol and reality, between menu and meal. Because Congress is directly or indirectly responsible for firming up what the flag stands for, namely the geographical United States, by not really doing much about the devastation of our forests, of our water and atmosphere, the reckless waste of our natural resources, and resorting to a form of economy which, under any sane circumstances, would be termed sheer lunacy. But see, they cannot distinguish between the symbol and we are all hypnotized with words and symbols. And so when the flag is more precious than the country, we are insane. When you say, I love my country, And what you mean by that is you feel emotions when you see the flag. You don't love your country at all. Love the country means to participate in its life in a loving way, in a considerate way. And after all, our animals are, in a certain sense, members of the United States. They're all these lovely creatures. And what we're doing is we are getting rid of birds at a fast rate. We've reduced certain populations of birds by as much as in the last few years. This love of country. So, as a result of this confusion, you see, a failure to see that the earth is not a kind of chunk of mineral resources and cow be exploited and be just eaten up. If we do that, we turn ourselves into a swarm of locusts on the planet. The price for eating beef is that you must conduct husbandry. You must help cattle to multiply, and you must care for them properly. The same with fishing. We have not husbanded them, and therefore they're on the way to extinction. That you've got to cherish the animals that you live off. And then furthermore, after that, to put in my particular prejudice, you've got to cook them properly. You don't just chew it up because it's supposed to be good for you. That's an irreverent use of dead animals and dead plants. They give their lives for you, and the proper response to that is to take it with reverence. And so that your act of cooking is like the rituals of a priest at an altar. It is the sacrificial altar, the chopping board and the range, which we use. And it's not a kind of a kitchens and lavatories where you put it into the upper end. So, but this can only come about, you see, in a situation where human beings are vividly aware of the external world as much as their own bodies. And you must allow yourself to feel that what you see is not merely out there. It's in your head. And your head's in it. And these things mutually interpenetrate each other like this. Now it's in your head, now your head's in it, now your head's in it, like this, you see. And this rhythm sets up what we call vision. So if you see that the inner world is as anything inside your skin, or anything, then you have respect for it. And no longer consider matter, for example. Take a piece of wood. A piece of wood is not just a chunk of stuff. Think about wood that way. You can't be a carpenter if that's the way you think about wood. We think we're dealing, you see, with these inert, unfeeling blocks of stuff. Have no feelings, of course. Bang it around. Mountains have no feelings. Blow them up with dynamite. But they do have feelings. And if you heard them, as the Indians say, I've just been with a whole bunch of Indians, the United States is getting ready to shake us off, as a dog would shake off fleas. And they say the storms, the earthquakes worse, the floods worse, and the insect pests will multiply in all sorts of strange ways, and finally get rid of us, and leave the land Indians who originally found it. Let's have a brief intermission. This morning about the problem of whether the extension of the network, especially by electronics, might not abolish. And I said I was planning some of its ramifications. Horse and carriage, wheel, and the airplane. are extensions of the human network of telephone is an extension of the nervous system. And into that we must throw, as an additional extension of the nervous system, data can be fed from files, the Internal Revenue Service, the police agencies, everything. So that in a matter of seconds, an enormous amount of information about him can be instantly known. In a rather similar way, it's not too far ahead, when you will be able to have a box about on your desk, which has a little screen on it, and a dial. And after dialing a key code, you will dial the catalog number of any book in the Library of Congress that you want. The spread pages of that book will appear on your television screen. When we get to worked with the agency of laser beams, you will of course be able to see solid three-dimensional images in color projected in a certain area. Whether you can kiss it. But when you get a phenomenon raising the question of where somebody actually is, it's technically perfect, you see. The difference between the reproduction and the original. A new kind of confusion. And we will perhaps even be able to think about the word reproduction. We say now, one of the meanings we give to the word reproduction is sexual reproduction of the species, or the biological method. We have reproduction through photography and all that kind of thing. Let's suppose we begin increasingly to be able to manufacture the parts of the human body, very perfect kinds of plastic, so that when your kidneys go wrong, the surgeon will simply replace them with a plastic reproduction, which will work equally well. And perhaps they'll have to reproduce in plastic in the brain. Can at least put in, which will connect with a computer system of some kind, which will do the same job. So that then, after the years go by and your parts have been replaced, are you the same individual? And we would say, well, no, you've been entirely replaced. Of course it does. You're being replaced all the time, different method. And just as, say, an institution like the University of California, which is a very rapidly changing university, if for some mysterious reason it remains the university such, even though the students, the office and administrative staff, and the very remain a constant. The university is behavior, and the organisms involved keep changing, but the pattern retains an identifiable continuity. So does your body. So does the bubble in the street. The heartstrings down below, although the water is running through them all the time and is never the same. So you can envisage the reproduction of the human being in that way, and at first you say, oh horrors, are we going to think of plastic replicas of ourselves? Will we be there in a sense? The soul survived. But you see, in California, it is what we call the University of California that is the soul. And its bodily expression keeps changing. So we find out that we are electronic echoes of ourselves, being perpetuated through the ages. We shall come to the that's what we already are. Only we have to do it again ourselves in order to realize it. We are already the most remarkable electronic patterns from the standpoint. So let's a bit lay that bugbear to rest. Although I must say, there is something about plastic in its present stage of evolution. There is a state of consciousness which those who are psychedelically hip or hep call the plastic doll. which everything looks as if it's made of plastic, as if leather or enameled tin, that it only reflects light and has no light inside. There is another side to the vision, whereby thing becomes living with light inside, a kind of beatific vision as distinct from a diabolic vision. And at the present stage of its development, it would suggest the diabolic vision. But it is through the diabolic vision that you gather the deep insight, the beatific vision way. Because any experience go down into, it's very important. It means exploring a sensation or a certain and all its implications, to find out what it is at root that you like about it or dislike. And you will find, if you explore the plastic doll vision, that it will bring about in the end a far greater depth of bliss and realization than merely exploring the things that are obviously so. Think about this funny thing, technology, considered as artificiality, in the light of the realization that there really is nothing. It's a very artificial state. That the constructs of human beings are really no more unnatural than bees' nests and birds' nests and constructs of animal and insect beings. They're extensions of us. So then, what about the situation when it arises that we are all computerized? That no one is hidden. I want you to notice something already about the Bell Telephone Company. They have a regulation whereby you cannot switch them off. You may have an extension in the house and you may switch that off, but you may not switch off your main phone.